Hey, it's Tony Bruschi, and this is our week in review over the weekend, taking a look back at some of the most compelling conversations and stories that we've covered for you of the last week. Brand new episodes back Monday morning, bright and early, 5 a.m. here on the podcast.
Murder in the morning from the Hidden Killers podcast.
There's been a lot of connections made to Bryan Kohberger when comparing his alleged actions to other serial killers of years gone by, one of those being Ted Bundy. We're going to take a closer look at that connection on this edition of Murder in the Morning. You may be surprised by some of these connections. Two survivors of Bundy's brutal reign of terror, they've voiced their unsettling observations recently. The recent murders eerily mirror the tactics Bundy employed in the gruesome Florida State University sorority house killings all the way back in 1978. Karen Pryor, a woman who bore witness to the true face of evil and lived to tell the tale, commented in an eerie, kind of the eerie resemblance on Fox Nation's Parallels of Evil, the Bundy and Idaho killing. She said, there have been many mass murders, but Kohberger's approach is almost a haunting echo of Bundy's heinous crimes. Whether it's a coincidence, I can't say. Kohberger, an otherwise ordinary 28-year-old scholar, stands accused of a series of shocking home invasion murders. The grand jury in Letby County, Idaho, has indicted him for sneaking into a rental home in a college town around the ghastly hour of 4 a.m. on November 13th, 2022. There, he reportedly claimed the lives of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, four young souls whose futures were abruptly and brutally cut short. When the terrifying news broke, it sent shockwaves through the community, evoking horrific memories for Cheryl Thomas, another survivor of Bundy's vicious assault. The reports of Kohberger's alleged crimes took her back to that dreadful event of January 15th, 1978. Thomas told Fox Nation's Nancy Grace, I could relate. Her voice echoed the horrors that Bundy's crimes inflicted on the innocent young women in the FSU sorority house. In the frigid early hours of that day, Bundy unleashed a nightmare on the sleeping sisters of the Chi Omega sorority house. He attacked four girls, leaving Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy lifeless. Pryor was one of the few who survived that horrifying ordeal. As police swarmed the Chi Omega house, Bundy managed to slip away, only to continue his rampage in a nearby duplex, leaving Thomas, too, with an ordeal that she would never forget. In a chilling recounting of her encounter, Thomas recalled, my neighbors heard the attack. They heard moaning and my phone ringing unanswered. Their suspicion peaked when they heard the sound of running. They realized something was amiss when they recognized the odd noise as Bundy fleeing through the kitchen window. Quick thinking led them to call 911, but the specter of fear had already taken root. The striking parallels between Bundy's and Kohberger's alleged murders couldn't be ignored. Both individuals had reportedly broken into residences, moving systematically from victim to victim. This unnerving similarity led private investigator Bill Warner to refer to the Idaho killings as potentially the work of a copycat of Bundy. John Henry Brown, Bundy's former lawyer, noted a disturbing common thread: the palpable rage that seemed to characterize both sets of these brutal murders. The horrific nature of the crimes is undeniable. Bundy used a log to bludgeon his victims, while Kohberger allegedly wielded a knife with lethal precision. Both methods indicated not just extreme brutality, but also a deeply unsettling level of personal rage. These were not distant in personal crimes. They were intense, close-quarters assaults that showed an intent to destroy both the inside and outside of their victims. It's a chilling testament to the overwhelming rage that must have consumed both perpetrators. It's a display of savage brutality, Brown said, reflecting on his career that spanned over 50 murder cases. These two cases stand out for their ruthless, terrifying nature. Most of the cases I've seen involve weapons like guns or are a result of confrontations or self-defense, but these are nothing short of cold-blooded rage. The shared fury has raised unsettling questions about Kohberger's actions and his motivations. Both he and Bundy invaded homes, executed brutal murders, and managed to escape, leaving the community in shock and fear. Both their crimes demonstrated a chilling level of calculation and ferocity. Both left their communities terrorized and their victims irreparably damaged. In the wake of these horrific events, the college towns they struck were left reeling. Students, once full of youthful bravado and carefree laughter, began to apply a newfound level of caution to their everyday routines. The shadow of these tragedies loomed over the campuses, serving as a grim reminder that evil can lurk even in the most innocent of places. Bundy, after confessing to a chilling tally of at least 30 murders, met his end in Florida's electric chair in 1989. In contrast, Kohberger's journey through the justice system is only just beginning. We've only just begun with the Carpenters. He faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and another for felony burglary. Over 6 months after the tragic killings, a judge entered pleas of not guilty on Kohberger's behalf during his arraignment. His trial, as of right now, set to begin in October. So, being on a college campus, killing these co-eds, getting away with it for a period of time, and the brutal nature of Kohberger's attack, I think, are some of the big ones that stand out to me. How about you, Stacey?
Well, the Ted Bundy situation, I remember I was just going into college myself when this was coming to fruition, that he was going to be put to death. And it just absolutely struck fear into anybody, any female. Obviously he was targeting women. He had these piercing eyes. Mm-hmm. There was something about Ted Bundy that he looked right into your soul. I'm looking at pictures of him right now, and it still looks that way to me, that he just is piercing your soul. And if I'm remembering right, wasn't he either he was studying to be an attorney or he was an attorney? I don't recall off the top of my head. But I think Ted Bundy was steeped in legal education. He was
studying that, and he was also studying criminology to a certain extent as well. So exactly. both seem to think they're very intelligent people, and probably smarter than the rest of the room. Bundy actually represented himself in court, which is interesting, and something I think some people were actually wondering if Kohberger would attempt to do the same, but obviously he's not.
Yeah, the two cases do have some parallels. The fact that he was probably stalking these people before doing it, both cases, and the violent nature. Because, if you just want to kill somebody, a gun is a great way to do it. This method of basically dismembering people and this horrific, brutal attack does show an immense amount of rage. It shows premeditation. It shows just that you'd have to be out of control. It's one thing, oh my God, I stabbed somebody once. Most people would snap out of it and go, oh, what have I done?
Yeah.
Not in these cases. I mean, with the Kohberger case, didn't we see blood seeping from the house? There was so much of it.
There was at one area of the house. Yeah. That was one of the spookiest things I think about that whole thing was a couple days later seeing that coming out of the siding of the house.
It just, there are very few ways to obliterate somebody that would produce that kind of blood. Yeah. I mean, maybe a shotgun blast, that type of thing. But if you're doing that with just basically like a hunting knife, there's something going on in your head that you could continue stabbing somebody and not stopping to think, oh my God, what have I done?
And there's a lot of comparisons with Kohberger to other serial killers, and I think some are valid. I don't know that Kohberger was trying to emulate any one of them, but I think he was so seeped into these stories and the reality of what these people did, and somehow found that appealing, and I think kind of took a greatest hits approach, if you will. And I'm not trying to be funny, but I mean that really, because there's a lot of similarities with BTK. There's similarities with Bundy. I think Bryan is an individual who, throughout most of his life, has had a very hard time understanding who Bryan is.
Yeah.
I don't think he knows his identity, and I think he probably has always been trying to search for that and seek that out and feel right in his own skin. And I think he probably found an element of that in looking at and studying criminology and some of these criminals. I think he probably related to them and could actually understand their plight better than others, and maybe felt, hey, I actually relate to these people far more than I do anyone else. And then, the rest kind of went from there.
Yeah, I think that's extremely spot on. Maybe there's a profile to be done here, that the type of person that could willingly do something like this fits this exact profile. And obviously there's going to be variations, but you've got somebody who in a lot of areas in their lives has similar situations that might lead them this way.
Yeah. Well, they're all sociopathic individuals. They all have that ability to just not feel and do things. And I think that's what makes them all fairly similar more than anything else, more than even just the actions of when things took place or how things took place. Sociopaths are going to act similar in many ways because that's how their brain works, then by default, some of the actions, the rage, all of that, coming out in very dramatic spurts, and then they can flip it off and be the guy at the coffee shop next to you that's, kind of staring oddly at someone. But, you don't think he's a killer until you find out later. But yeah, it's an interesting, another connection there with Bundy. I just think there's when we have these sort of people, they're enigmas. People are searching for a way to try and understand why they did what they did, who they are, what made them up. And the more you study them, the less you understand them, quite honestly. I mean, maybe you kind of start to get a little bit of it, but at the end of the day, unless you do think that way, I think the normal mind or the non-killer type mind has a very, very hard path of trying to understand that, dissect that, and make any sort of reason out of it, because it doesn't work for most people. But for the select few, it does. Creepy story.
It's just bone chilling.
Yeah.
It's just bone chilling. I don't know what else to say about it. It's the Ted Bundy thing. I remember locking windows and doors for quite some time after that. Not that it's a bad idea to do that now, but just it instilled fear that there was a possibility of a monster, an absolute fucking monster amongst us.
Very similar to how life was in Wichita, Kansas for many years when BTK was on the loose. That was one of the things that stood out to me when I moved there and lived there for 10 years. Everybody has a BTK story. It affected everyone in some sort of way, where exactly what you're talking about, the locking of the doors. Wichita is a decent sized city, but it's small when you actually are there. You realize how connected everyone is, and everybody knew somebody who either suspected BTK was at their home, or he killed somebody that they knew, or because there was a lot of other attempts they believe that he made on people that were not successful, and he escaped and got away. Even Carol on the show, on many of our episodes here, has a BTK story of thinking that, because she actually lived right in the neighborhood where some of those murders were taking place. It's troubling. I just finished Carrie's book on it. She's the daughter of BTK over the weekend, Carrie Rawson. And it was interesting because we were tweeting back and forth while I was listening to the book. And I was telling her, I like the references around the city because these are places I used to go to all the time, like the grocery stores and things of that nature. But I'm going to have her on soon to talk about that case. Obviously, it's her dad. It was a very interesting read on her life, because you expect a book like that about your dad, who's a serial killer, I guess, going in to be one of horror, that it's going to be this horrible human being that you grew up with, unbearable, and then he was going around doing these things. It's very much a story of love between a father and a daughter. She had no idea he was doing any of these things while they were going on, and how he was able to flip that on and off and be able to go commit absolutely heinous acts, but be a great father to his daughter.
Isn't that amazing?
And help her grow up, and was there for her on so many different ways and times. And you would, the stories that are in that book about like their camping excursions and just life in general, none of it would make anyone go, oh, that's probably a serial killer at all. But yet he was doing these things, and that's been something for her to try and square up of, you know, she can place different points in her life of, oh yeah, this is when we took this trip. Well, at the same time, Dad just killed so-and-so around then too. It's fascinating, but it's a very interesting perspective for those who deal with someone in their family or a loved one who would commit such horrible acts. I think of the family of the Daybells. I think of the family of Kohberger, of his parents, and what they're trying to reconcile and make sense of. But she is very bravely stood up, and it hasn't gone into the shadows. She's telling her story, and I think she's helping a lot of people, whether it be on a huge grand scale like her dad did with those horrible crimes, to even lesser crimes, just being able to relate to someone who's trying to square reality of who they believed they knew with who that person really was on the outside.
I think a lot of people have that kind of detail in their family. I don't admit it very often, but I've got a brother who's a felon. He was absolutely wonderful when I was growing up. He was my hero, my idol. I emulated everything he did. And then he turned a corner, maybe in his late 20s. He never murdered. Well, I don't know for sure. I don't know if he murdered somebody. He claims he did. He's never been held accountable for it, but he was doing some money laundering and some drug, I guess drug trafficking on a very large scale, and got caught for it. And so it's one of those issues in your family where you don't really want to talk about the fact that you have a felon in your family, and how do you deal with that, and how, does that change you as a person? Does that change people's perception of you? It's something you go through, and it doesn't mean you are like that person. But it's definitely something you have to address and I guess own it. And I that's wonderful that she's got a book out and that she is talking about her story. It's really important. It is. It's a very interesting story. I do highly suggest checking it out. I did the audiobook version because I don't have time just to sit and read. So I was building the studio and getting the house picked up over Memorial Weekend. Because my stepson is in baseball, so they had tournaments all weekend long, and I was working around the house and just found it to be very interesting. I'm sure the kids were weirded out by me listening to this book about a serial killer in my pocket as I'm like cleaning things. Like they're used to me now. Like, oh, that's just Tony. He's over there. That's Tony. It's all good.
But yeah. But a very interesting read. I do highly suggest checking it out. Carrie Rawson is her name. And the book itself is titled A Serial Killer's Daughter. Very, very much worth checking out. If you want to weigh in on this or any of the stories that we talk about here, we have a phone number for that. It's 888-554-5537. 888-5-KILLER. We would love to hear from you and take your calls. In fact, we're going to be doing that on our very next segment here this morning. If you're listening to us in sequential order, calls are coming up next on Murder in the Morning. Stay with us.